Hello and welcome to another episode of Coffee with Developers. My name's Dan, and on today's episode, I'm joined here by Ben and Morten from Faith at VCCP. I'm going to let you guys introduce yourselves in a second. Just tell us a little bit about what it is that we're going to be talking about today and what Faith at VCCP does.
I mean, we're going to be talking a little bit about Daisy, which is one of the projects we've done. Faith is a part of VCCP. VCCP is an advertising agency, and Faith is like an AI arm that we've created within the agency that we did in about a year and a half ago now, 2 years ago almost, where when everything was happening, we decided that we needed to have a specific point of view on AI, and that's where Faith came from. A lot of people in the industry was very sort of scared. There was a lot of fear mongering, but we decided that the best way to actually get a handle on it was to jump in and make sure that we were part of that whole development and from the beginning, because then we were able to shape it a little bit more. And yeah, that's where Faith came from, really.
Yeah, the kind of narrative behind it was to, flip the script a little bit in terms of an optimistic outlook, and and our positioning was that AI, when used responsibly, could be an accelerator for human creativity and imagination.
Just to kind of give some context a little bit, what are your roles over at Faith? Do you take different angles? Have you got different specialisms, or what were your sort of backgrounds?
Well, we're creative directors, but we've always had like a pedigree in innovation. It's always been something that's really, really, we've been very passionate about. We've always wanted to and enjoyed creating experiences that help improve human lives using this kind of optimistic outlook of how technology can enable that. So that's anything from like we did the O2 in Fortnite, put a gig on for, and again another project for O2, put a gig on during the pandemic. So those are the types of things that we kind of like look to embrace, and we've always had kind of like a grassroots adoption kind of approach of whatever's new and out there we want to start playing with. And obviously, the explosion in the emergence of generative AI was just a perfect kind of thing for us to get on board quite quickly. And luckily, the rest of the management in the agency identified this as a disruptive technology, which warranted that focus of talent and resource and time to form a point of view and to start seeing how it affects our agency and our industry.
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting you say that about the kind of putting a positive spin on it, because around 2 years ago, when things like ChatGPT came out, I was actually a teacher, and it was like it was the worst news for most teachers, because they thought, well, essays don't mean anything anymore, and students can just cheat, and all of these things. Whereas I think some of, I'm going to put myself in the category of some of the younger teachers, and may not look it, but the fact that we were maybe more welcoming of it, because it seemed like, well, this is just going to speed up our productivity and that there's real potential here. And I think you're right in saying, you said about using it responsibly is really important, and we'll get to that in a little bit. But it's just been very interesting that even though it's only been 2 years really since these chatbots have become commonplace, and sort of, my nan would use one, but there's still sort of two sides. There's the fear of the future, and then there's the like, let's embrace it and go all in. You mentioned Daisy at the start. She's not here with us. I was hoping I was going to see Daisy looking back at me and have a conversation, but she couldn't make it. I think she's am I right in saying she's a bit busy kind of warding off hackers and scammers? Is that about right? Tell us about Daisy. What does she do?
Well, yeah, I mean, Daisy really is she's sort of become the darling of the whole agency, I think. We had this idea a long time ago now, actually, watching some YouTubers who do scam baiting, which is basically, if you don't know what it is, it's basically talking to scammers on the phone and making them really angry, and they use that for content, which is great content. But also there's a sort of another angle to it, in terms of if you're speaking to them, they're not speaking to real people, which means that they can't actually scam real people. So we had the idea of coming up with an AI old granny that can do that. So that can potentially speak to thousands of scammers at the same time and keep them all occupied, so they can't actually talk to real people. So we thought that was a really good idea. So we did some research and started building prototypes and figuring out, is this something we can actually do? And yeah, I mean, obviously, we also work with our client O2, who they have a communications problem in the sense that a lot of these scams happen on not just O2, but on telephone networks themselves. And O2 is actually doing a ton of work to combat that, but it's a bit difficult to sort of talk about it because it's very technical. It's like filters and AI algorithms that sit within their infrastructure. But trying to tell that story in a more interesting way, Daisy became almost like a vehicle for doing that. She's using a lot of the same types of processes that O2 is already using, but just wrapping it inside more of a communications idea that really not only helps like waste scammers' time, but helps our client sort of talk about it in a positive way and sort of put some emphasis on the fact that they are actually doing a lot of work to combat scammers.
It was also the fact that, you know, a lot of brands, including O2, you know, before it was like, how do you manage this? And one of the primary angles was education. You know, you would create content which would raise awareness for the problem, but it just doesn't get a lot of cut through. And like 7 in 10 Brits last year were affected by scams. So this is an epidemic. It's scaling. I mean, it is a global issue. But from O2's point of view, it's like this just education angle, whilst not unimportant, isn't as effective or as engaging. What can we actually do to create some disruption, which would allow us to tackle the problem head on? As Morten said, weave a compelling story to engage people and essentially, you know, move from this whole storytelling to story doing kind of narrative.
I just wanted to pick up on some of the, you know, the kind of creation of it, I suppose, or the prototyping, because, you know, I know you've mentioned that, you know, your primary kind of, you know, background is creative direction. It's kind of more in the traditional marketing sort of realm. Do you have like was it a team of developers? Was it some you know, contractors that are brought in to kind of handle that technical side, or how did you sort of go about it?
Well, I mean, we are creative directors, which does sound like it could be a bit traditional, but actually I have a degree in computer science. So I did computer science sort of growing up, I was about to say, and I'm a bit of a nerd anyway, like we both are. And that's part of the reason why we got involved in AI in the first place. It's just because it was just interesting. So we built it internally, everything, we built it ourselves, not just us, but we have some other people in the agency. We have a really excellent young engineer who was working with us to do it. But it was basically us who built the prototype and sort of took all the different parts of it and sort of tested them individually and sort of built it internally. So yeah, I mean, it was sort of a team effort, but we didn't luckily have to get outside help. We could do it ourselves.
I mean, in terms of how we divided that up, I do not have a computer science degree. The good thing about it is, you know, everyone knows that as this technology emerged, it's an easy access point for people to learn. And if you've got the mindset and you're curious enough, then, you know, starting to jump into using LLMs is actually, you know, fairly easy to do. So whilst Morten and Gabrielle, one of our model trainers, was essentially developing kind of like the technical workflow and identifying the challenges therein, I was looking more at world building. So, you know, we'd figured out quite early on that we wanted to have this AI granny. I mean, that was she was always an AI granny from the moment Morten kind of had the moment of epiphany. And there's lots of reasons for that, which we can go into in a little bit. But yeah, I was able to start getting into that world building thing and adding some dimension to her, which is as important as reducing latency, is creating a character that's believable.
That side of it is something I think that it taps into a wider discussion. You know, I think some of the criticism or people that are very skeptical of AI, just in general, you know, people that they could have issues in any number of different areas with AI, but the argument that I often hear is people saying it's style and no substance, and that, you know, it will do something, whether it be, let's say it writes an essay for you, but not a very good one, or it writes a script for you and it's just not a very good one. And so that little bit of human element, that creativity, you're saying the world building, it's almost the non-technical side, but it's the thing that helps deliver the technical side and make it believable and make it enjoyable to use. I think there's something really interesting in that, where it's almost like you could have got so lost in the technicals that actually it would have lost the being a grandma, feeling like a real grandma. And that leads me on to my question, as you mentioned it there, Ben. Why grandma?
Well, I mean, first of all, everyone can relate to a grandma. The other thing is there were both some creative reasons. Like, first of all, people have this assumption that older people are easier targets. The scammers themselves look at older people as easier targets. So everyone sort of knows that narrative. So by sort of flipping the script a little bit on that, we knew that was going to sort of tug at the heartstrings maybe a little bit more. The fact that, you know, it was an old granny who was having her revenge on the scammers just felt like a more compelling story. And yeah, like I said, playing into the stereotypes and sort of using the stereotypes against the scammers. And then there was technical reasons as well. Like, when we started it out, we were really battling latency in terms of getting latency down to a point where it felt live enough for the scammer not to be sort of tipped off. And having a old lady, again, these scammers, they think that maybe she doesn't speak so well, or so she's lacking in sort of hearing, or whatever it is, and we could build that into the personality that Ben was developing to sort of make sure that we played into that. So she would pretend sometimes to not hear what you were saying. We could inject little things like that to sort of have the model thinking in the background while we were sort of we had a layer that was engaging with the scammer. So it all came together, really. It was partly a creative thing, partly a technical thing.
Yeah, it was a real confluence of those things. And also in terms of like the motivation of the scammer, you know, they go through all of these different numbers, and it's hit, hang up, people don't pick up at all. And, you know, it's a numbers game. And if they get someone on the line, it's like, okay, they've gone through and reduced several significant hurdles just to get you on the line. So they're already really, really motivated to keep you on, because you are the lead that can be turned into someone who you can essentially victimize, defraud. So they're also, you know, willing to put up with more. Also, the fact that, you know, unfortunately, a lot of these operations are run overseas. There is a kind of perceived, oh, they're very far away, and, you know, there might just be a little bit of call latency there. So if you build in the character and the biases inherent in that, the fact that it's potentially overseas, and then the motivation of the scammer, it really, really comes together to create a little perfect storm where if you're able to reduce it down to a couple of 100 milliseconds delay, that is absolutely enough for you to have a decent, natural flowing conversation.
You spend so much of your time as a developer optimizing and reducing latency so it's not a thing, and then to almost have to do the rollback where you realize actually this is making this unbelievable now is a really good kind of example of how UX can be quite complicated, and that it's not always what the programmer says is the best thing is not necessarily always the best thing for the product. So it's really interesting. I just want to move on to some of the things that I think our audience will be really interested to know how some of this plays out in terms of battling against things like, you know, obviously we're all in the UK, and we may not be in the EU anymore. We'll leave that for another episode, but we do still have GDPR, and I'm assuming, am I right in saying this is just mainland UK that this program is available, or is it available to everybody? Could it be catching scammers worldwide, or how does it kind of target? You know, does that privacy and that GDPR issue kind of come into play in terms of how this works, or is it they're scammers? So of course we sit within GDPR, but there's you know, it's a strange relationship, isn't it? Kind of looking after the people that are trying to scam people.
Yeah,
you know,
absolutely.
and yeah.
Well, I mean, we have a really good legal department here, and you know, if any agency that's wandering into the world of generative AI, you know, you need a good clued up legal team who are willing to learn as fast as you can as these kind of precedents are starting to be made, or these situations which haven't had rulings on yet, and you know what there's risk appetite for you as an agency and the client. And it was definitely one of those questions in terms of what rights do the scammers themselves have. We also, you know, one of the things we haven't mentioned is we trained a lot of Daisy's data from Jim Browning, So we were able to work with like the UK's like top scam beta, and we had, you know, a conversation around that, and we'd observed how other content creators had, you know, handled that situation. And I think you're right, we kind of came to the conclusion that at the end of the day, these were people who were operating in nefarious criminal activities, and that, you know, we'd gone through the due diligence our side, and through a collective responsibility point of view, we decided to go forward with the project.
I suppose the other thing is that when we're using a lot of these models, there's these inherent biases that are kind of built into them. And I was interested to know, the way I almost think of it is a lot of these bots, if they were a person, you wouldn't describe them as an elderly grandmother. They tend to have a very sort of middle of the road attitude on everything, just the average of everything they've been trained on. Did you have to do much in terms of, you know, helping to mold the language that the person might use to maybe make it sound like an older person, or maybe more formal? As we know, older people in the UK will speak a bit more formally than younger people, perhaps. Did this kind of play in, that you had to untrain it from some of the biases that were built in?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you know, using shots in prompting is obviously a very well-known and common technique. But yes, you'd have to, we have like a little process for character design now, just through, you know, the iterative development work that we've done. And we have like a scheme which we've created, which works quite well in terms of that whole world building thing, from, you know, what's your name, how old you are, where you're from, what are your hobbies, what's your family, you know, all of these things start getting to kind of like, and you don't necessarily have to overly add detail, because you still want to keep everything quite lean, because, you know, as Morten was saying, you know, everything that you add might add latency. So when you're looking at how the kind of like voice is interpreted to determine the question, to go and check the kind of like background data that, you know, you've basically got, which formulates the response. If it's absolutely vast, then, you know, it's going to cause delays. So there was an exercise in crunching that down to how little is still enough to create a really compelling character. But shots in terms of language, the types of phrases that she used, that was all part of it. And it was also an ongoing process. As Daisy works and we get things that she says, we go, oh, we like that. That sounds like Daisy. Now, is it good enough to add to that kind of like training? And it could be, for instance, like notoriously, she never had a cat called Fluffy, but one day she did, and we liked it. So we wanted it, and now she's got a cat called Fluffy.
Yeah, I think also another very important point is like, yes, all the things that she says, but also how she says it. And that was something that was really important to us as well when figuring out the voice, because there was lots of ways of training voices. And if you actually look at voice libraries, there are already tons of stuff that's available. But if you look at the best platforms out there, we use 11 Labs for the voice. And what happened is that those libraries, they're all trained on narrative performances or storytelling and other things like that. At that time, we're seeing more of them now, but at that time, like conversational AI wasn't really a thing. So having a voice that felt conversational was something that we really were very keen on. And we did work with one of our colleagues, Grandma, to actually provide the voice and clone her voice, which was done over a long period of hours of talking to her about just anything. Like, luckily she was very chatty, and I got to sit in a booth with her for a couple of hours and just talking to her about all the kind of things that she really enjoyed. And that by doing that, we got lots and lots of natural language data and that we could use to train the model. And that helps really frame everything she's saying in a way that makes it more believable, right? Because there's a sort of tonality to how you speak when you are in a conversation rather than how you speak in other situations. And when you're on your phone, you know what, you want to feel natural. So that was a really important part of sort of making it work. And that's kind of goes to see how we had to use lots of different models to actually make it work, that all work together. And sort of, so that was where a lot of the work goes in, to sort of fine tune all the different parts of it and make sure that it's all working together when you sort of put all the elements together.
Daisy was, sorry, the person who voiced Daisy is actually a colleague's grandmother. And it was all it was all part of the proof of concept development phase. We had thought that maybe we would need to go down the more traditional voice artist route. And at the time, obviously, everyone knows what's going on in the media, and for good reason. There is a lot of nervousness and trepidation about the use of people's voices, and actually going off and starting to open those conversations up with agents who represented voice artists. It was quite clear early on that actually this was going to be quite a difficult process, and it's certainly one that we didn't necessarily shy away from. It was just at that point where everyone had gotten so used to the voice that we got that we all went, well, this is Daisy now. And it was the ongoing joke that Daisy is like everyone's gran at VCCP. Yeah. Like my gran had a lemon meringue pie recipe, things of that. Morten's nan couldn't stop knitting, that goes in. It's a colleague's voice. Just through the natural flow of chatting about this, so many people contributed to making Daisy who she is.
And it's fascinating because I think it's, if we map that back onto sort of, for most of our audience that will be, working with sort of LLMs in a very text-based way, right? They'll be kind of, generally everybody is opening their IDE, their code editor, and they're saying to it, please look at my code, help me fix it. Why doesn't it work? And then it will come back to you with some text, and you never really think about if that voice feels human until you read the words and you imagine a human saying them, and it never feels human. It feels, Chris, our VP of Developer Relations, always says it sounds like an overly excited programmer from the 80s in San Francisco, like a very specific type, very grand language. Everything's the best. It's awesome. It's amazing. And nothing feels like really grounded in reality. So it's really interesting to then see how this collaboration of skills has meant that you've kind of met in the middle, right, and enabled that voice to become more human by adding the creative processes to it as well as the technical ones.
But a lot of that came from observing platforms like Character AI that starting to rise in popularity, and by starting to play with those kind of platforms, that was when we understood that there is an opportunity for character design, that actually you could shift the base and actually create characters with depth, which could behave in particular ways, which was really fun.
But I think it's exactly what you're saying. Like, all the voices were like that. It's very clearly everyone's putting on a performance, and that just wasn't right for what we needed. So it was very clear from the beginning, pretty much, that saying, okay, we need to train our own voice, and we need to do it in a way that makes it as believable as possible.
Yeah, I suppose otherwise, if the goal is to get the scammers on the hook, then, as you said right at the start, if they've gone through this process of kind of a numbers game, yes, they really, really want to scam this person, but you could very easily lose them if they get any kind of sense that it's not real. So it's fascinating to kind of hear how you arrived there. Sorry,
even now, I think, like, I see lots of stuff on YouTube and stuff where they're using auto narration, and you can always tell. And I think in a conversation, it's the way that we work with Daisy. Actually, at some points, even though I knew I was talking to a robot, it fooled me pretty much. And I think that is sort of testament to all the training that is done both on the LLM side and the voice side. But also, I think just as you start talking to it, as long as it's good enough, you sort of get sold on it, and then you're just immersed. It's like playing a computer game where you just don't see the graphics anymore. You're just playing, right? It gets to that point because it's good enough that you sort of suspend disbelief a little bit. And I think that was sort of the bar for us to hit, which obviously we're very glad that we did.
We had Daisy on dial on our phones, so like you'd be walking to work, and that's how you would test. You'd just be chatting and just starting to see if the latest iteration of what you trained in was actually working, was improving things. And yeah, you'd start off by maybe going through some of the scam scenarios that kind of like Jim had given us and stuff like that. But then you just start chatting up. She would take you on a tangent. That's what she's designed to do. She wastes time by taking you on tangents into that narrative of her life. And all of a sudden, you've forgotten the script that you were doing. You're chatting about her grandson and what he did at the weekend. And then you kind of go, what? No. Okay, anyway. And that's cool. But I think the proof of the pudding was that moment, wasn't it? That we actually connected for the first time.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, like we said earlier, we've been testing and testing all individual parts and stuff like that. And we tested it on lots of people within the agency. Can they tell? They have to rate that. We gave them a whole bunch of things they need to rate it on. And then at the time we thought, okay, now we're ready to actually test it. And then we hooked it up with to real scammers. And when we got the first call, that was pretty amazing. We were sitting in a little sort of random storage room down here, just to, I mean, because that was the only room that was available for us to test that. And we were like 3 or 4 of us in there. And then because it was really early paper prototyping stage, we had one laptop which had the scammer calling in on, and we had another laptop which Stacey was running on, and they were basically just in the same room, the speaker and microphone connected like that. So we were sitting there, we had to sort of keep quiet. But when the first call came through and they just started talking, and it was like we had to cut the call after 15 minutes because that was kind of the proof of the pudding. That was such quite a special moment, because like we worked quite a lot on it. We were very passionate about the idea, but actually hearing it working, hearing Daisy just talking to this scammer, it was just quite a special moment.
She kind of said she actually stopped the conversation to start talking about a bird flown into her garden, and then the scammer, who was actually a female scammer, was like she said that she was into nature. I know it's a tactic for scammers to lean into the interests because that's how they build rapport. But it was just amazing to see this exchange, ping pong ping. And it's like we just there don't. Please don't, you know, because it was an amazing experience. I think it's something we'll never forget.
No, I can imagine. And I mean, I think, you know, again, just mapping it back onto that programming sort of scenario where it's rare that you've built something and then you come to test it and it works. It's quite rare, you know. So when you said 15 minutes, I thought, wow, if that was a program, you know, that's like a website almost fully working and not finding any bugs. It is really testament to that kind of process you've gone through. I think the other point that's sort of one that always comes up, because it feels like somewhat of an afterthought when people think about AI at the moment, but it's also something we're being reminded of quite a lot, is, you know, energy consumption, right? There's a lot, it requires a lot. It often, if we're using sort of things like video, if we're generating video, it's hugely, you know, taxing in terms of the power consumption. And some estimates say that if you generate one AI image, you have done the equivalent of charging a mobile, you've done the equivalent of charging a smartphone 3 times. Now, of course, you know, this doesn't include video, right? You've got the promotional video to go with it, but the tool itself is audio based. Did any of these kind of conversations, you know, come up? Of course, O2 has got its own kind of, you know, commitments and its own kind of, let's say, targets that it might have around, you know, kind of energy consumption. Did this come into it, or was it perhaps by it being audio, there was perhaps a calculation that, you know, the energy consumption isn't too bad and that it might be offset by the social good that's being done by catching scammers, you know? What were your thoughts on it? Did it come in or not?
I mean, it definitely, it's part of everything we do at VCCP. We do have a sort of a policy upon energy use. I think like you pretty much sort of alluded to it in terms of the fact that it was voice-based. I think when we look at where most of the energy goes, it goes into training the models, and of course that we did some fine-tuning of the models, but it was all done like locally on like sort of consumer-grade hardware, stuff like that. Which means that if, like, let's say you're going to be rendering a video in Premiere Pro or whatever, that's going to use about as much power as some of the stuff that we were doing. So it just depends. Like, I think a lot of the energy consumption definitely happens. But it happens sort of like in the pre-training of the models, and that is definitely something we consider when using them. I think in terms of our sort of contribution, or Daisy's contribution, it was relatively low because it can run fairly simply on a single GPU.
So I think there's probably also like the kind of proactive way of using this technology to fight scamming, this preventative kind of approach. And this kind of scales up to like the other things that O2 are also doing. You know, they are investing in, you know, highly scalable AI-driven technology, which is very much kind of like algorithmic based. And it is in itself quite efficient in the way that it is able to algorithmically identify and flag things. So be that anti-spam kind of detection, or it could be caller ID. So it's about understanding that whether it's Daisy or that, if you're going to go and tackle the same problem a different way, there'll also be a carbon cost. So which is going to ultimately potentially be the most efficient way of doing it, and in and of itself, the method of tackling it might help to reduce carbon in the long term.
Yeah, I mean, and that's great to hear as well, because I think it's something that everyone's struggling with, right? That, you know, if we want this progress in this technological area, then we have to use it. And of course, you know, by the more we use it, the more efficient it can become. But if we don't use it, it stays inefficient, and then, you know, the criticisms remain. So it is kind of an interesting, you know, time to be using this technology, especially when in the way you guys have used it, you're very early adopters, right? And you're pushing this stuff forward, but trying to do it in a responsible way. So it's really good to know. So I suppose that brings us on, you know, finally to just look at, is it too early to say, but what's the impact been? How many scammers have we got in handcuffs, or how many have we had on the line? You know, what's it looking like in terms of the success of the project?
I think it's important to say that we're not the police, so our end goal wasn't necessarily to put scammers in handcuffs. In some ways, it's quite an innocent thing in the sense that we waste scammers' time. Again, it goes back to what we were talking about earlier about like the responsibility towards the scammers or whatever. It's a fairly innocent thing. We literally just waste their time. We don't have them log on to our services and then we can log in and hack into the systems. We don't do that because that's just not what we do. So in that sense, we haven't sort of caught any scammers, but the most important thing for us was to protect our customers, or our clients' customers, from scam calls. And we've talked to thousands of scammers, and I think that's what the whole thing is about: talking to as many scammers and spending as much of the time as possible. So those are the sort of hard results. Of course, we work in a creative agency, and a big part of this is also the awareness piece we talked about in the beginning, about making sure that people understand that O2 already have other AI-based scam detection systems, and this is part of a bigger solution of saying, well, we want to make sure we can raise awareness about all these things we're doing, and sort of Daisy is just sort of a part of that.
But there are lots of different kind of like tangible results. So even the reporting, because a lot of what Daisy is an awareness campaign as well. But essentially, we were promoting awareness of the 7726 reporting number, and that went up significantly. I think it was 44%. It went up as a spike from when the campaign went out, because, you know, it kind of caught on the story of Daisy, the storytelling part of it really caught on, and we had like over 2,000 pieces of, you know, content created from publishers. So we did have a really big spike, and for a brand, that's kind of like a fantastic kind of result, because essentially what you want to be doing is raising awareness. You also want to make people understand that whilst you are trying to repair the reputation of your brand and to reassure customers of your role of protecting them, that they feel empowered and they've got the tools to start understanding some of these tactics, understanding that if they are on the line to a suspected scammer, what they can actually do about it. So the effectiveness is fairly broad. And again, it was also to advertise that or promote the fact that O2 were not just investing in Daisy, they were in fact investing in a range of kind of like AI-driven services, which would help protect their customers at scale.
Is there anything else that's coming down the line that you might be working on in this sort of area that you might want to share with us, or is it all a little bit under wraps, NDAs and agreements, or anything you can let us know about?
Daisy has got more life in her, I was about to say. But yeah, we can't really say so much about it. It's just one of the things that was very interesting is looking at some of the opportunities that Daisy might be able to do from a sort of tech perspective. Like if you, for example, one of the things that's really hard to do when you are a business and trying to combat scammers is understanding exactly how scammers work, because for obvious reasons you can't listen in on scam calls with real people, because that's just an obvious thing. But if a scammer is calling a robot, we might be able to listen into that instead, because you're not actually listening to customer calls, which would obviously be a massive no-go. So there are things that we can explore further down the line and saying, okay, maybe Daisy can serve some different roles in the future.
And that's that security conference.
Yeah, that's true. When Daisy was first unveiled, I mean, there was quite a lot of attention around it. And one of the things what happened was that one of their security experts was going to a security conference in the UK the week after, and all of a sudden they reached out and were like, "Oh, can you guys talk a bit about Daisy?" And then what we did do was we actually brought Daisy to the security conference and put her on stage on a big screen, and we had one of the other security experts try to scam her
From one of the other telcos.
From one of the other telcos, yeah. So one of the other telcos, they tried as hard as they could to scam Daisy, and obviously she didn't budge, just wasted his time. So it went down pretty well at the security conference, and that's a really nice way of sort of wrapping up the thing about the impact is that, we saw real people who really liked it. We saved real people's from being scammed. We've had really good response from like normal people who are saying, "Oh, best use of AI ever," which alludes to the thing we talked about in the beginning about people being skeptical about AI, but also in actual security circles of people who really know what they're talking about. It sort of sparked discussion there and was an inspiration to a lot of people there in terms of using technology. So it's sort of been had an influence on so many different layers, which is part of why we really like what Daisy ended up being.
Absolutely. And I think, just to sort of sum up and say that, it caught our eye. Of course, I reached out initially to somebody through LinkedIn after seeing it, and it's definitely got a lot of potential in terms of, the interest it's going to garner now, but also what people can learn from, the character building side of things and how you marry together the creative world with the technical world, with the world of marketing all in one place. I think it's you've done a really good job, but also created a product that hopefully for people that do feel that AI is all style and no substance, this project shows them that it can be both, and it can be quite satisfying as well. Because I will say I'm a big fan of those scammer payback channels. So yeah, I really like it. It's quite satisfying to see the work that Daisy's doing. Really, maybe next time we'll get her on the show. Okay, well, just to wrap up, I just want to say a massive thank you, Ben and Morten from Faith at VCCP, on behalf of O2 to talk about Daisy. Thanks very much for your time for both of you, and we'd love to have you on the show again. And you take care.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having us.